Hello and welcome. Today, we will dive into one of the most inspiring journeys of the Bible, the miracles of Jesus. These supernatural acts reveal not only the power of God, but also the love and compassion of Jesus for those he encountered. We will follow the chronological order of these miracles and see how they transformed lives and continue to inspire us today. Follow along with the biblical references and reflections that can help us apply these lessons to our daily lives. We begin with the first miracle of Jesus, turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana. John 2 verses 1 to 11. During a wedding feast, the wine ran out, and Mary, Jesus' mother, interceded. Jesus instructed the servants to fill jars with water, and he transformed that water into the best wine served at the feast. This miracle was not just a demonstration of power, but also a symbol of the new covenant that Jesus would bring, transforming the ordinary into something extraordinary, just as he does with our lives. Next, we have the healing of the official's son in Capernaum. John 4 verses 46 to 54. In his second miracle, Jesus healed the son of a royal official who was on the brink of death from a distance. The desperate official went to Jesus and asked him to come to his home to heal the boy. However, Jesus simply said that the boy was already healed, and the man, believing in his words, returned home and found his son healed. This miracle teaches us about the power of faith and that the physical presence of Jesus is not necessary for him to work in our lives. Shortly after, Jesus cast out an unclean spirit from a man. Mark 1 verses 21 to 28, Luke 4 verses 31 to 37. In a synagogue in Capernaum, Jesus confronted a man possessed by an unclean spirit. The demon recognized Jesus and cried out, but Jesus commanded the spirit to leave the man. With authority, Jesus cast out the spirit, showing his dominion over evil forces. This event reminds us that Jesus has power over the spiritual realm and that those who trust in him are protected. After this episode, Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, who was suffering from a fever. Matthew 8 verses 14 to 15. Mark 1 verses 29 to 31, Luke 4 verses 38 to 39. After leaving the synagogue, Jesus went to Peter's house, where he found Peter's mother-in-law bedridden with a fever. He touched her, and immediately the fever left her. This miracle shows that Jesus cares even about the small illnesses and daily afflictions, demonstrating his loving care for each one of us. Later, Jesus performed the miraculous catch of fish on the lake of Gennesaret. Luke 5 verses 1 to 11. Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret when he encountered fishermen who were tired and frustrated after catching nothing all night. He asked Peter to cast the nets one more time. Even with doubts, Peter obeyed, and the nets filled with so many fish that they nearly broke. This miracle teaches us to trust in Jesus, even when circumstances seem unfavorable, and about the importance of obedience in our life of faith. Jesus also healed a man with leprosy. Matthew 8 verses 1 to 4, Mark 1 verses 40 to 45, Luke 5 verses 12 to 16. Jesus encountered a man covered with leprosy, a terrible and highly contagious disease. The man asked Jesus to cleanse him, saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched the man and healed him instantly. This act shows us that Jesus does not distance himself from the marginalized and impure, and that his mercy is greater than any illness. In Capernaum, a Roman centurion sought Jesus to heal his servant. Matthew 8 verses 5 to 13, Luke 7 verses 1 to 10. In Capernaum, we find another example of faith in action. A centurion asked Jesus to heal his sick servant. But recognizing Jesus' authority, he said he was not worthy to have him in his house, and that just a word from Jesus would be enough to heal his servant. Jesus, amazed by the man's faith, performed the miracle from a distance, showing that sincere faith can move the heart of God. Also in Capernaum, Jesus healed a paralytic who was lowered through the roof by his friends. Matthew 9 verses 1 to 8, Mark 2 verses 1 to 12, Luke 5 verses 17 to 26. A group of friends brought a paralyzed man to Jesus, lowering him through the roof of a house because the crowd was preventing them from entering. Jesus, seeing their faith, first forgave the man's sins and then healed him physically. This miracle shows that Jesus has power over both the body and the soul, and that the forgiveness of sins is as important a form of healing as physical healing. Another powerful miracle was the healing of a man with a withered hand. Matthew 12 verses 9 to 13, Mark 3 verses 1 to 6, Luke 6 verses 6 to 11. Jesus entered a synagogue and saw a man with a withered hand. Knowing that he would be criticized by the Pharisees for healing on the Sabbath, Jesus did not hesitate to do good. He healed the man, showing that love and compassion are more important than religious rules and traditions. In Nain, Jesus raised a widow's son from the dead. Luke 7 verses 11 to 17. As he passed through a small town called Nain, Jesus saw a funeral procession. A widow was taking her only son to be buried. Moved by her grief, Jesus touched the coffin and commanded the young man to rise. The son was resurrected, and Jesus returned him to his mother. This miracle reveals Jesus' power over life and death, and his deep compassion for those who suffer. Jesus also healed 2 blind men during his journey. Matthew 9 verses 27 to 31. As he was walking, 2 blind men followed Jesus, crying out for mercy. Jesus said, "Let it be according to your faith," and then touched their eyes, restoring their vision. Once again, we see the importance of faith in Jesus to experience his healing power. Jesus healed a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years. John 5 verses 1 to 15. At the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, there lay a multitude of sick and disabled people, hoping for healing. Among them was a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned of his long suffering, he asked the man, "Do you want to be made well?" The man explained that he had no one to help him into the pool when the water was stirred, so he had lost hope of being healed. Moved with compassion, Jesus simply said to him, "Rise, take up your mat and walk." Immediately, the man was healed, stood up, and walked. This miracle shows Jesus' power to heal and restore, even when all hope seems lost. It reminds us that Jesus sees us in our deepest struggles and can bring healing, no matter how long we have been waiting. Jesus then performed the famous miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fish. Matthew 14 verses 13 to 21, Mark 6 verses 30 to 44, Luke 9 verses 10 to 17, John 6 verses 1 to 14. A large crowd of more than 5,000 people followed Jesus to hear him and be healed. As it was getting late and the people were hungry, Jesus asked his disciples how they could feed the crowd. With only 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus performed the first multiplication, feeding everyone abundantly with 12 baskets of leftovers remaining. This miracle demonstrates Jesus' power to meet our needs and his compassion for the crowd. Jesus walks on water. Matthew 14 verses 22 to 33, Mark 6 verses 45 to 52, John 6 verses 16 to 21. Right after the multiplication of the loaves, Jesus asked his disciples to go ahead by boat while he withdrew to pray. During the night, As the disciples struggled against the wind and the waves, Jesus appeared walking on the water. Peter, in an act of faith, asked to come to him, and for a brief moment, he also walked on the water. However, when he felt the wind, he began to sink and cried out for help. Jesus rescued him, showing that with faith, we can overcome any storm, but we must also keep our eyes fixed on him. Calming the storm, Matthew 8 verses 23 to 27, Mark 4 verses 35 to 41, Luke 8 verses 22 to 25. While Jesus and his disciples were in a boat, a violent storm arose, threatening to sink the vessel. While the disciples were terrified, Jesus was sleeping. When he was awakened, he simply commanded the wind and the waves to calm down, and immediately there was peace. This miracle teaches us that, even in the storms of life, Jesus is in control and is able to bring us peace. Healing of a mute man possessed by a demon, Matthew 9 verses 32 to 34. A mute man, who was possessed by a demon, was brought to Jesus. After casting out the demon, the man began to speak again. This miracle shows the power of Jesus over all forms of possession and illness, and how he restores full spiritual and physical health. Healing of many sick in Gennesaret, Matthew 14 verses 34 to 36, Mark 6 verses 53 to 56. When Jesus and his disciples arrived in the land of Gennesaret, the people quickly recognized him and brought many sick to be healed. All who touched the edge of his garment were healed. This miracle demonstrates that the simple act of faith in touching Jesus was enough to bring healing, revealing the power of his presence. Healing of the daughter of the Canaanite woman, Matthew 15 verses 21 to 28, Mark 7 verses 24 to 30. A Canaanite woman asked Jesus to heal her daughter, who was possessed by an evil spirit. At first, Jesus seemed to reject the request, saying that he came only for the lost sheep of Israel. However, the woman's persistence and faith impressed Jesus, and he healed her daughter from a distance. This miracle teaches us about persevering faith and the inclusion of everyone, regardless of their origin. Healing of a deaf and mute man, Mark 7 verses 31 to 37. In Decapolis, people brought to Jesus a man who was deaf and had difficulty speaking. Jesus healed him in an unusual way. He put his fingers into the man's ears and touched his tongue with saliva. The man began to hear and speak clearly. This miracle reminds us that Jesus is willing to use all means to bring healing and restoration. Second multiplication of the loaves and fish, Matthew 15 verses 32 to 39, Mark 8 verses 1 to 9. Once again, Jesus multiplied loaves and fish to feed a crowd of 4,000 people. With 7 loaves and a few fish, he satisfied the hunger of all, and there were still 7 baskets full left over. This miracle reflects Jesus' infinite generosity and his ability to provide abundantly in times of scarcity. Healing of a blind man in Bethsaida, Mark 8 verses 22 to 26. In Bethsaida, a blind man was brought to Jesus. He healed him in 2 stages. First, the man began to see people as trees. Then, after a second touch, his vision was fully restored. This miracle teaches us that sometimes healing, whether physical or spiritual, can happen gradually, and we need to trust in God's process. Healing of a boy possessed by an evil spirit, Matthew 17 verses 14 to 20, Mark 9 verses 14 to 29, Luke 9 verses 37 to 43. A desperate father brought his son to Jesus. The boy suffered terribly, being thrown into fire and water by an evil spirit. The disciples could not cast out the demon, but Jesus, with authority, healed the boy. This miracle emphasizes the power of prayer and faith, and the importance of fully trusting Jesus to overcome the most difficult spiritual challenges. The payment of the temple tax, Matthew 17 verses 24 to 27. When questioned about paying the temple tax, Jesus instructed Peter to catch a fish, and inside the fish's mouth, Peter found a coin sufficient to pay the tax for both of them. This miracle teaches us that Jesus is above all earthly authorities, and that he provides even for our most everyday needs. Another notable miracle was the healing of a man born blind in Jerusalem. John 9 verses 1 to 12. Jesus spat on the ground, made mud with his saliva, and applied it to the man's eyes, instructing him to wash in the pool of Siloam. This miracle revealed God's glory and Jesus' purpose to heal not only physically but also spiritually. Jesus healed a crippled woman, Luke 13 verses 10 to 17. In another synagogue, Jesus encountered a woman who had been crippled for 18 years. Bent over and unable to straighten herself, she had suffered for a long time. Jesus, moved with compassion, called her forward and said, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." He placed his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. This miracle not only demonstrated Jesus' power over physical ailments, but also revealed his deep compassion and desire to restore those who have been bound for so long. Jesus healed a man with dropsy, Luke 14 verses 1 to 6. Shortly after, Jesus was at the house of a Pharisee on the Sabbath, where he met a man suffering from dropsy, a painful condition causing swelling. Despite being watched closely by the religious leaders, Jesus asked, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" Without waiting for an answer, he healed the man and sent him on his way. This miracle emphasized that Jesus placed love and compassion above religious traditions, showing that doing good should never be limited by human rules. Healing of two blind men in Jericho, Matthew 20 verses 29 to 34, Mark 10 verses 46 to 52, Luke 18 verses 35 to 43. As he was leaving Jericho, two blind men cried out for mercy as Jesus passed by. Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and both were able to see. These blind men teach us the importance of crying out to Jesus and trusting that he will always respond with compassion and power. Resurrection of Lazarus, John 11 verses 1 to 44. One of Jesus' most powerful miracles was the resurrection of Lazarus, who had been dead for 4 days. Jesus arrived at the tomb, prayed to the Father, and then commanded Lazarus to come out. Lazarus came out alive, still wrapped in burial cloths. This miracle not only demonstrated Jesus' power over death, but also his deep compassion, as he wept with Lazarus' sisters before performing the miracle. Healing of the 10 lepers, Luke 17 verses 11 to 19. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus encountered 10 lepers who asked for healing. He told them to go and present themselves to the priests, and as they walked, they were healed. Only one, a Samaritan, returned to thank Jesus. This miracle teaches us about the importance of gratitude and the spiritual value of acknowledging what God does in our lives. Healing of the high priest's servant, Luke 22, verses 50 to 51. During Jesus' arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. Jesus, in an act of mercy and calm, touched Malchus' ear and healed it. This miracle, performed in the midst of his own suffering, shows us that Jesus always chose healing and forgiveness, even for those who were against him. After his resurrection, Jesus performed another miracle, known as the second miraculous catch of fish. John 21 verses 1 to 14. He instructed his disciples to cast their nets on the right side of the boat, and they caught a large number of fish. This miracle showed that even after his resurrection, Jesus continued to provide and guide those who followed him. Each miracle performed by Jesus is a clear demonstration of his divine power and his unconditional love for humanity. These extraordinary events are more than just displays of power. They are profound lessons of faith, compassion, and hope. Even today, Jesus continues to work in our lives, bringing healing, peace, and transformation to those who trust in him. May we always remember what he has done and live with the assurance that he is still by our side. If you enjoyed this content and want to continue learning from the stories of the Bible and the life of Jesus, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and to share this video with a friend. May God bless you, and see you in the next video.